Pete, we're going to start with Manchester City. Now, Julian Alvarez, there's been some talk he's been tipped with a move away potentially from the Etihad. Have you got an update, please, on his valuation and his current status at the club?
Yeah, current status, bit of an sort of unsettling one, this for probably Pep Guardiola and Manchester City, with Julian Alvarez coming out and admitting that he is frustrated with his role at the club, feeling he doesn't play in enough of the big matches, also giving suggestions that he would like to move to a warmer country. We've seen that one before, haven't we, over the years, with some players not liking the weather in Manchester and looking to move to sunnier climes. Pep's had to deal with this before, but yeah, he really won't want to lose Julian Alvarez. I thought he played a key role for the club last season when Kevin De Bruyne was injured. He stepped up into that number 10 role and came up with a number of big performances and big goals as well. So, yeah, I think if City were to even consider selling him, you're looking at £70 million plus for a player of Alvarez's calibre. World Cup winner, can play in a number of roles, and I just think he'll get better and better as well. I think he's at a good age now where he'll progress and really fulfill his potential as well. City are under no pressure to sell, we know that, although the player has hinted that he is unhappy. I'm sure Pep will sit down with him and have a discussion with him once pre-season's out of the way and try and persuade him to stay for at least another season. And he's under contract until 2028, so yeah, he's on a long-term contract. I don't think Manchester City will be rushing him out the door, but Pep has admitted in the past if a player is unhappy, he is open to letting them move on as well. But we've seen this in the past with Bernardo Silva, who's suggested that he's unhappy, and he always remains at Manchester City as well. So I think we could have a similar situation here. Pep might have to put his arm around Alvarez and tell him that he wants him to remain part of the plans, and I don't envisage a move for Alvarez this summer.
Paul, picking up on that then, how is Pep going to fit him into the team with Haaland? Are they going to play two up front? How is he going to keep him on side for the foreseeable future if he is to stay?
Listen, Pep doesn't change, does he? He doesn't change for anybody. He's not influenced or swayed by any outside media, outside influences. More so his players. He does his own thing his own way. And if Alvarez wants to stay, I mean, he knows his role in the team. He's still only 24 years old. I mean, he signed a contract extension last year, didn't he? Till 2028, like Pete said. So it's just, listen, for me, it's just, there's a couple of strange noises coming out of Manchester City at the moment. You know, the Edison stuff, the transfer potentially muted to Saudi, the De Bruyne situation that had to be cleared up, now Alvarez. And it just seems like for the first time in a while that there's a couple of players that are not happy being bit part players at Manchester City or not playing a main role at Manchester City. So it's an interesting one to come out now. And the fact that Alvarez has said that he'll comment further on it after the Olympics. I mean, we know the Olympics, it's not a long tournament, so we're not going to have to wait a long time for him to come out and clear it up. But it's for a player who signed a long-term contract, well, an extension last season. He knows his role in that team. He's not going to oust Haaland. If Haaland's fit, he plays in the big games. But we saw last season, Haaland's not always fit. They need another option. Alvarez will get his game time, like many others do at Manchester City and other clubs. They think, oh, well, I'm not playing in the big games, I'm only a bit part player. But then you get to the end of the season and they've played 32 games. And that's what happens at these big clubs with the big squads.
Moving on, Pete, we know that there's been some talk talking of exits about Calvin Phillips potentially leaving. Is he closing in on a loan move potentially this summer to another Premier League club?
Yeah, I fully expect Calvin Phillips to move on this summer. He's been getting a few minutes for City in pre-season. I think he played centre-back against Barcelona and did quite well, but I don't see him having any chance of remaining at the Etihad. I think it's a mutual parting of the ways is needed, whether that's a permanent deal or a loan deal. I'm sure Calvin Phillips probably would prefer a permanent deal so he can go and set down some roots at a new club. Everton are seemingly leading the chase for Calvin Phillips right now. They are in the market for a new midfielder to replace Amadou Onana. So, yeah, I think that could be the perfect landing spot, probably on a loan deal initially, because I don't think Everton could get anywhere near Manchester City's valuation for Calvin Phillips. But going to Everton, I think, could be a good move for Calvin Phillips because, as we know, the last few years have been a bit wasted for Calvin Phillips. It just hasn't worked out for him. And everybody would like to see Calvin Phillips get back to what he was when he was at Leeds United, when he was starring for England as well. And nobody more than Calvin Phillips will be hoping to see that happen again. He wants to go and kickstart his career again and back playing regularly in the Premier League. And I'm sure Everton and other clubs will potentially look at Phillips between now and the final few weeks of the transfer window to see if a deal can be done.
And so in terms of potential other exits potentially, I mean, Paul, there's been some talk. Jack Grealish has said he was sort of annoyed about being omitted from the England squad, quite disappointed. What do you make of his situation at Manchester City? Can you see him having a potential impact on the club going into the foreseeable future?
Yeah, listen, you look at him in pre-season, he looks as fit as he's ever been, doesn't he? It looks like he's taking the bull by the horns. He's going to have been gutted to left out the England squad. I mean, you look at the players that Gareth Southgate took, you look at Wharton, Eze, Palmer, Anthony Gordon, very, very little game time and impact between any of them. You're telling me during that tournament he didn't look to his bench and wish that he had Jack Grealish and James Maddison there? I think that was, hindsight's a great thing to have. But the omission of Grealish and Maddison, I think was potentially a mistake going into that tournament. You look at what he can do, Jack Grealish. The biggest thing he gets you is free kicks. He wins fouls in the opposition's half. And I think he would have just given that England side something different coming off the bench. But that's by the by. I think for his impact at Manchester City, Doku's come in. I think Doku's been excellent since he's come in. Watched him in the Euros as well. Was really impressed with him there. And I think that Grealish is going to have a battle on his hands to get his place in the team regularly and play in the so-called big games like Alvarez talks about. But I think that's something that he's going to relish. You look at the way that he's handling pre-season. You look at what he's saying at the moment. There's no talk and no sign from Jack Grealish that he's moving on. No talk that he wants to move on. Whether you get to January and he's not played much football and he hasn't had an impact, but I think Jack Grealish just secretly in his own head, he's having a little battle with football at the moment, and he's determined to win it, and he's going to play, and he'll play in the start this season, and he wants to have an impact at Manchester City because of what's happened at the Euros, and it's clearly hurt him.
Paul, following on from that, we know they haven't won a game yet on their pre-season tour out in the US. Jim, we can take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, Pep said their conditions getting better. Do you still expect them to start the season flying?
You don't read anything into pre-season. I mean, we do because we've missed football. I mean, we've had the Euros, which isn't the Premier League, and we all miss football, so we all watch the games, and you try and read into pre-season results, and you don't. It's all about getting minutes into players' legs. The final game before the start of the season, even then, you've not necessarily got all your players fit because we've had the Copa America, we've had the Euros. Players are on different levels of fitness, and I do think that it affects the start of the season because I've been in squads and teams where players have come back later than others. And managers are now so driven by sports science, by what coaches say they can and can't do to players for their load, for their training levels, etc. Managers are sometimes put under pressure not to play players as soon as they would like to normally. So that's why we get a few strange results at the start of the season as well. So you see the Premier League, teams don't necessarily always hit the ground running. I certainly wouldn't be worried about my team if it was Manchester City, the way that they're performing in pre-season, simply because he's had half of the squad there. He's still getting dribs and drabs back. They won't be getting the minutes into the legs. You don't read anything into the pre-season, but I do think that the tournament seasons, as in the international tournament seasons, does have an effect on the first few games of the season because of the load on the players.
Yeah, I think if you want to play Manchester City, you don't really want to play them in any time of the season, but start of the season is probably the best because Pep's admitted before they've probably been undercooked. So if you want to try and get a result against City, it's probably a good time to play them. But yeah, there'll be no concerns over them long term. They've been undercooked before in pre-season and have gone on and walked away with the Premier League title, and they'll be right up there again, no doubts.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.